The CHIPS and Science Act officially kicked off yesterday. Applications now open and companies are now able to apply for the grant to begin producing chips in the United States. For more on this and the U.S. Stance towards China, we welcome in Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. Senator Kelly, thank you so much for being here. Before we sort of dive into the CHIPS Act, I wanted to ask you a sort of bigger question that the CHIPS Act is part of, because we have this act now open for applications. We had a House hearing late yesterday, sort of with how the U.S. should be approaching China from a policy perspective, right? That is all happening. We had Chinese economic data this morning. And so first, I wanted to sort of get your big picture thoughts on how the U.S. should be approaching China right now at a time when tensions have been rising.
Well, they're our biggest, geopolitical adversary, right now, clearly. I mean, we've got this war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. But when you think of the biggest threats to the United States right now, I would, put China at the top of the list. And that's why as soon as I got to the United States Senate, one of the first things I started working on was this CHIPS Act, which is the legislation that is ultimately going to fix the issue we have with semiconductors. The best semiconductors in the world right now are made in Taiwan, very close to China, supply chain on the other side of an ocean. We rely on these chips for pretty much everything, anything that has an on-off switch. But more importantly than that, sophisticated weapons and weapon systems. I spent 25 years in the United States Navy, flying airplanes off of an aircraft carrier as a test pilot. We need those chips. Well, now, because of this legislation, they're going to be made here in the United States of America.
And of course, Arizona has positioned itself as one of the locations that wants those chip fabs. We've already had some announcements from the likes of Intel and Taiwan Semi that they're going to be building some plants there. So what can you tell us about Arizona's plans for applications under the CHIPS Act, and kind of what your sales pitch is in Arizona as being competitive in this process?
Well, we were just naturally competitive because we've been a leader in this industry for decades. Intel already has a presence there. TSMC now is in the process of building one manufacturing plant. They're going to be building a second one. They've announced that already. So we're already, a hub for semiconductor manufacturing in the United States. This is just going to expand dramatically because of this legislation. It's also going to create really good paying jobs. I had an opportunity to talk to this young mom of 3 who was out of work for over a year. She couldn't find a job. And then she sees in her spam folder, she finds this thing about this thing called the Quick Start program. It was a program at a community college to learn some basic skills that then led to an interview. Well, she is now a semiconductor manufacturing technician at Intel. Great success story. So these are great paying jobs, important for our national security, but it's also important to the rest of the country because it's going to bring down costs.
How do you ensure that costs of living, as you have so much investment, so many new people that may be able to make their way into Arizona and sure find jobs and be able to start careers there? We've seen what that's been like in Texas. We've seen what that's been like in California in the past. How does Arizona make sure that the cost of living does not skyrocket with a lot of the injection of new talent and new companies that are looking to really earmark spending or allocate spending to build out their capacities in chips in this case?
Well, we're going to need other companies to invest in infrastructure in the state of Arizona, in and around these new companies. And it's not just the major chip manufacturer. It's not just about Intel or TSMC. There's all the other companies that supply them with the equipment and materials they need to manufacture what you could argue is, some of the most sophisticated hardware that our country makes. So we're going to have to make sure that there are companies out there building affordable housing, that the grocery stores are being put in. We've got a plan. We're in the process of executing this plan in Arizona. The Arizona Commerce Authority and the leadership at the state, I spent a ton of time with them to make sure that we're reaching out to all the right companies to get the additional infrastructure built to support these major companies.
Well, and on that front as well, Noah Smith recently wrote an interesting article where he talked about some of the barriers to construction in the U.S. and to building out industries, much of that on the local level. And so when you talk about removing those barriers, what does that look like in Arizona in terms of not just, bringing costs down for living, but also some of these companies that want to build have complained that the costs in the U.S. versus China versus Taiwan are just too high.
Yeah, and it's not just the cost to build. I mean, it's the cost of labor's higher. That's a good thing, actually. I mean, it's good that when somebody works in a semiconductor plant, they get a salary that they can actually raise a family on. That's a really positive thing. There are barriers. The CHIPS Act is addressing several of these. It's bringing the research and development here. It's bringing the manufacturing here. But there are also barriers, and not just with local and the state government, with the federal government. I was on the phone just yesterday with the Secretary of Commerce talking about some of these things, like, just as an example, the permitting process. It's a long process, and if you don't get ahead of it, and we're going to work with these companies to make sure they get ahead of it so they can meet their construction schedule, but at the same time follow the federal government regulations to make sure we're not harming the environment. So it is it's got to be sort of an all government approach, and other agencies are involved, just not Commerce. There's also DOD, and clearly the United States Congress and my colleagues who got this legislation across the finish line.
Senator, you sort of alluded to this a little bit, but the federal government grants are coming with conditions. And this is something I talked to the Commerce Secretary about as well, including that the companies that receive money are not supposed to use that money for buybacks, for example. And also, on the topic of that employee you mentioned, affordable child care, that these companies have to ensure that that is available. The companies that you've been talking to who want to locate in Arizona, have you heard any pushback from them on these various conditions?
Well, first of all, let me make this clear that this is not a blank check. This is a lot of money, a lot of taxpayer money. Taxpayers worked hard to make this money. They pay taxes. We're going to invest this to the benefit of the United States. But they just can't go do what they want with it. So there are some constraints here. They can't use the money, just as an example, the CHIPS money for stock buybacks. And we're sending a strong message that is not appropriate to even use, other sources of funding. On the child care situation, they need to find a lot of employees. And one of the barriers, especially for women, talented women that could be in the workforce, is childcare. So, a provision, that came from Commerce, I think it came out of Commerce, to encourage or require these companies to have childcare. This is a win-win situation. It helps families in Arizona and in other states that are going to have these companies there. But at the same time, it helps the employer. It's going to help them attract the workforce that they need. In Arizona, we're not just talking about thousands of new jobs. This is potentially, when you consider the chip manufacturers, but all the other companies out there, it's tens of thousands of good paying jobs.
Senator, I couldn't help but think about, when you were talking about the workforce, the number of CEOs who we speak with and business executives who have said that we need better immigration policy, that we need more reform to be able to make sure that we are solving for the employment gap right now. And with the creation of all of these new jobs, making sure that those opportunities are filled. What steps would you like to see taken on that front, given Arizona's border state status?
3 words: comprehensive immigration reform. It's important to our economy. We've got very low unemployment right now. Companies could grow, and it could help us grow our GDP if we had the workforce we need. Some of that workforce can come from overseas. Some of it we can grow, locally through community college programs. We've got programs in Arizona that do not require a 4-year degree that'll lead, like the example I gave with the young woman with 3 kids, that'll lead to, good paying jobs that you can raise a family on. We're a border state. We've got a border security problem. We need strong border security, but it's important that we also recognize that we benefit from a strong immigration system that helps us bring the additional workforce that we can't develop locally here to our country to support an expanding economy.
Senator, it feels right now like many Americans see that immigration system as a mess, simply put. Of course, there was that New York Times story out over the weekend about migrant children who are working underage in factories across the United States, many of them, if not all of them, coming across the border. At the same time, that, as you say, there is this need for immigrant workers. CEOs we talk to all the time cite that as an acute need, that they want immigration policy to open up to allow them to get more foreign workers. How do we fix this, especially in a divided Congress?
Yeah, Julie, I would agree with you. It is a mess. It needs to get much better. And it's on us. It's on Democrats and Republicans working together, working across the aisle to do stuff that clearly benefits our country. Often, this issue, I would say, as much as, or maybe more than any other issue that I can think of, becomes political. And it becomes about an election, and it shouldn't be that way. We should be making decisions here in the United States Senate that is, based on one thing: what is in the best interest of our country. Are there
any common points on the immigration issue that you actually think that Congress can make some progress on?
Many. Whether it's Pathway to Citizenship for Dreamers, who I look at as American as my own two daughters, or, what you mentioned, which is we need more folks to fill these jobs. They can be very technical jobs, but there's also, the agriculture, jobs are, we don't have the workforce we need in the state of Arizona. I can talk to my colleagues in other states. They've got the same exact problem, regardless of where. I mean, if you're in the agriculture industry, you're having a hard time finding the workforce you need. There's an H-2A visa program. It's too complicated, and there's not enough of those visas available. So this is something that benefits our country, and it allows us to grow our economy. It's up to us to continue to work on this. I hear my Republican colleagues, most of them that I talk to about this, they get it. We've just got to figure out a way to put the politics aside and just make decisions based on, in my opinion, science and data and facts.
Senator, your history is well documented. Your service as a U.S. Navy combat pilot, a NASA astronaut. We'd be remiss if we didn't at least get one question to you about space, and particularly where we're seeing even more launches come in the partnership of both public and private entities, notably NASA and SpaceX, really catching headlines recently here with the number of launches that have continued to, I dare to say, skyrocket over the last couple of years here. Where would you like to see space exploration further so that people here on Earth can actually reap some of the benefits and the allocation of dollars that goes with that too, as prescribed by Congress even?
Well, let me be clear about this. The U.S. taxpayer benefits greatly from the investment that our government has made in our space program and the aerospace industry. We've been a leader on this for decades now, from the time we first started sending people and then satellites into space to where we are today. Thanks to SpaceX and some other private companies, the cost to get a pound of payload into orbit has gone down dramatically. That helps. I mean, it helps our telecommunication industry. It helps our ability to forecast weather and, to deal with climate change. It helps the military with surveillance and intelligence, reconnaissance, those type of things. So this has been a big benefit. And I want to see it continue. I feel like we are in what aviation was like in the 1930s. There was an airplane that was built, first airplane that could carry a good number of people, could make a little bit of money, and it was safe enough so they didn't routinely have accidents. And that was the DC-3. We're now seeing here, about a little less than 100 years later, the same sort of thing happening in space, specifically in low Earth orbit. But this also allows NASA to send people back to the moon, one day onto Mars, learn more about our solar system. More knowledge, just helps benefit us as a country.
For us lay people, we just call it cool. Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, thank you so much for spending some time with us here this morning, talking about the CHIPS Act and a lot else besides. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, Julie. Thank you.